Imagine this scene. It's a brutally cold January morning in Canton, Massachusetts. You know, the kind of cold that just sinks right into your bones.
Oh yeah, biting cold.
And then this absolutely chilling discovery, a body, found partially hidden by fresh snow, right there on someone's front lawn.
It's just a horrifying image to even picture.
And this wasn't just, a sad local event. It was the opening act for this massive legal firestorm that basically grabbed the entire country's attention.
Yeah, it really did.
Yeah.
And at the center of it all, these two people whose lives collided in the most tragic way, Karen Reed and John O'Keefe.
Exactly. That morning, back in 2022, it just ignited this case that spiraled, didn't it? It became this whirlwind of completely opposite theories, intense media scrutiny, and this really fierce, sometimes ugly battle in court.
Yeah, ugly is a good word for some of it. It became this huge saga that, wasn't just about what happened that one night. It ended up questioning, the whole justice system.
Yeah.
How investigations are run, how much public opinion matters, all of it.
You nailed it. And that's what we're getting into today. This isn't just a recap. We're going to really try to unpack the incredibly complex, super publicized Karen Reed murder trial. We'll look closely at what the prosecution alleged, why they thought she did it, but then also the defense is really powerful, sometimes kind of shocking counter story, and all the controversy around the investigation itself. That's huge here.
Absolutely. Our mission really is to sift through all these layers. You've got conflicting evidence, complex legal arguments flying back and forth, and this massive public debate that just turned the whole thing into, well, a national obsession.
Right.
So our goal is to help you, the listener, understand the core facts as best we can, maybe pinpoint some of those aha moments where things clicked or seemed to shift, and really grapple with the big questions this case throws up, about justice, truth, and how the legal system even functions under that kind of intense spotlight.
It's not just what happened to John O'Keefe, but how this whole thing played out. Okay, let's start by setting the scene for that night. Because to really get the legal arguments later, you need to know who these people were. So who exactly were Karen Reed and John O'Keefe?
Okay, so Karen Reed, she was 44 at the time, an equity analyst, also professor at Bentley University, a professional woman. She was living with her boyfriend, John O'Keefe.
And he was a Boston police officer.
Right. John O'Keefe, 46 years old, Boston PD. And what adds another layer of tragedy, I think, is that he was raising his niece and nephew. He'd taken them in. So he wasn't just a cop. He was their guardian. They all lived together there in Canton.
And their relationship itself became a really big point of contention during the trial. Right? It wasn't exactly painted as smooth sailing.
Oh, absolutely. It was central. The relationship was described as, volatile at times. O'Keefe's own niece and nephew, who lived with them, actually testified and described it as toxic. So there was frequent, often pretty intense fighting. And it wasn't just their word. There was this specific piece of evidence that got a lot of airtime, a voicemail. From Karen Reed to John O'Keefe, left on the very night he died. And in it, she was reportedly just screaming, "I hate you."
Oof.
Yeah. And the prosecution obviously jumped on that. They used it to try and establish a motive, or at least show this context of a really troubled, maybe even explosive relationship dynamic.
Okay, so we have the people, the relationship backdrop. Let's talk about the night itself, January 28th, 2022. What actually happened leading up to the discovery?
So that evening, Reed and O'Keefe were out with friends, a group that included a lot of O'Keefe's police buddies and their wives. And according to multiple people there, the group got, quote, very drunk, like a significant amount of alcohol involved.
Okay, a typical night out that maybe went a bit far.
Seems like it. And after that initial gathering, the night wasn't over. Karen Reed drove John O'Keefe to an after party. And the place they went, the home of Brian Albert. Now, this is important. Brian Albert was a police sergeant detective, and he worked with O'Keefe.
Ah, okay, so colleagues. That detail becomes pretty critical later on, doesn't it?
Incredibly critical. Because this is the exact point where the whole story just fractures.
Yeah.
What happened after Reed supposedly dropped O'Keefe off at the Albert house? That became the absolute core debate of the entire trial. Two totally different, completely conflicting stories emerged.
Right. What were those two stories?
Okay, so story number one, the prosecution's theory. They argued that Karen Reed, in what they called a drunk rage streak, backed her huge 6,000-pound Lexus SUV into John O'Keefe right there on the lawn, hit him, and then just left him there to die in the freezing cold in the snow. A story of essentially abandonment fueled by anger and alcohol.
And the defense.
The defense painted a completely different, frankly shocking picture. They alleged O'Keefe actually went inside the Albert House. And inside that house, he was brutally beaten by other people who were there. And then, maybe even worse, they claimed there was a cover-up, orchestrated by people with law enforcement ties, all designed to frame Karen Reed for his murder.
Wow. So not just saying she didn't do it, but that specific other people did and then framed her. That's a huge claim.
A massive claim. It wasn't just reasonable doubt. It was a full-blown accusation of conspiracy and corruption. A fundamental disagreement about everything that happened.
Okay, that definitely sets the stage. Let's fast forward then to the next morning, January 29th. It's around 5 a.m. Karen Reed wakes up back at O'Keefe's place, realizes he never came home. What does she do then? What's her state?
Well, according to testimony and phone records, panic seems to kick in pretty quickly. She starts frantically calling the other women who were out with him the night before, trying to find John. She's clearly worried, reportedly saying she was scared he might be dead. She even apparently floated this idea, like, what if a plow hit him, which is chilling in hindsight.
And she later claimed she didn't remember much because she was so drunk.
Exactly. She said her memory of those crucial hours around midnight, 1 a.m., was incredibly fuzzy because of how much alcohol she'd consumed, which of course could be interpreted in different ways. Genuine memory loss or convenient memory loss. Both sides had their take.
And then comes the actual discovery, the moment they find him.
Right. So around 6 a.m., still no word. Reed and a couple of the other women, Jennifer McCabe and Carrie Roberts, were with her. They decide they have to go back to the Albert House and look for him. And it's Karen Reed herself who spots John's body. He's lying there on the front lawn, cold, unresponsive, partly covered by that fresh snow. Just a horrific, traumatic scene.
And her reactions, what she said right then and there, became absolutely critical for the prosecution, didn't they? They really zeroed in on that.
Oh, absolutely. It was a cornerstone of their case. According to people who were there, paramedics, the other woman, Reed, was distraught. She apparently lay on top of him, tried CPR, called 911. But crucially, they claimed she kept saying things like, I hit him, or maybe questioning, could I have hit him?
Which could be interpreted as shock, maybe, or guilt.
Exactly. The defense argued it was shock, confusion, maybe even suggestion from others. The prosecution presented it as a damning admission. Like even through the alcohol and panic, she knew or suspected she was involved. These statements were incredibly damaging for her.
And the evidence they found almost immediately seemed to back up those statements, unfortunately, for her.
Yeah, it really did, at least on the surface. Her blood was drawn at the hospital. This was around 9 a.m., hours later. And even then, it showed a BAC of 0.08, which is the legal limit to drive in Massachusetts.
So hours later, she's still at the legal limit.
Right, which means, according to the experts who testified, if you extrapolate backwards to when she was driving around 12:30 a.m., her BAC would have been way, way higher, potentially anywhere from 0.13 up to maybe even 0.29. That's extremely intoxicating.
Okay.
And then later that same day, investigators find these pieces of a broken taillight in the snow right there at the scene. And even more significantly, they find tiny fragments of the same plastic in O'Keefe's shirt on his body.
And it matched her car.
It matched Reed's black Lexus SUV, which, when they examined it, was indeed missing part of its rear passenger side taillight. So the prosecution presented this as, pretty much undeniable physical proof. Her car hit him.
So you've got the statements, the high BAC, the physical taillight evidence. It seems like the focus landed on her very quickly.
Extremely quickly. With all that converging, the words, the alcohol level, the car parts, Karen Reed was arrested just 3 days after John O'Keefe's body was found. And the stage was set for this incredibly high-stakes, very public legal fight.
Okay, let's dig into the prosecution's case first. Their narrative was pretty clear, wasn't it? A vehicle, a choice, and, well, tragic consequences. What was the core argument they put to the jury?
Their core argument was unwavering. Karen Reed, fueled by that extreme intoxication, possibly in a drunk rage streak, as they put it, deliberately, or at least recklessly, backed her huge SUV into John O'Keefe. And then, crucially, she made the choice to leave him there, to die in the freezing snow. They leaned into the drunkenness, didn't shy away from it, but argued it didn't excuse her actions or the fatal result.
That's a really stark picture.
Yeah.
Let's break down the pillars supporting that. What were the key pieces of evidence and arguments they used?
Okay, first, the intoxication. That high BAC, even hours later, was proof positive she was severely impaired at the time of the incident. They argued that kind of impairment leads to reckless actions, poor judgment, even if it wasn't like a carefully planned murder.
Makes sense.
Second, those statements at the scene. I hit him. Could I have hit him? They presented these not just as possible admissions, but as direct indicators that she knew, even if vaguely, what had happened. Words spoken in the heat of the moment, right where he was found.
And what about the relationship, the toxic descriptions, that voicemail? How did they fit that in?
They use that to build context, maybe suggest a motive. The testimony from O'Keefe's niece and nephew about the toxic relationship, the fighting, and that "I hate you" voicemail from just hours before. They played that for the jury. It wasn't direct proof she hit him, of course, but it painted a picture of intense anger, volatility. It suggested a relationship where a violent outburst wasn't unthinkable.
Right, setting an emotional stage. But the physical evidence, especially the taillight, that must have felt like their strongest link.
For the prosecution, yes. That felt like concrete proof. The broken taillight pieces found right there, and especially the fragments in his shirt on his body. The fact that they perfectly matched her damaged Lexus. They presented that as irrefutable evidence of a collision between her vehicle and John O'Keefe.
Okay.
And this tied directly into the medical examiner's findings. The ME ruled the cause of death as blunt impact injuries to the head combined with hypothermia. And, importantly, the ME report stated there were no obvious signs of an altercation or a fight. This finding directly contradicted the defense's later claim that he was beaten up inside the house.
No, it's important to clarify the intent part for second-degree murder. They weren't arguing she woke up that morning planning to kill him, right?
That's a really critical legal point. And the prosecution made sure the jury understood it.
Yeah.
They explicitly said they did not have to prove she intended to kill John O'Keefe. They didn't even have to prove she intended to hit him.
So what did they have to prove for that charge?
Their argument was about the intent behind the act itself. Her conscious decision, they argued, to put the car in reverse, to head back towards where O'Keefe was. Whether she meant to strike him or not, doing that, especially in her condition, was incredibly reckless. And then the key part for second-degree murder, the decision to leave him there after the impact. That conscious disregard for his life, knowing how dangerous the situation was, leaving him to die in the cold, that, they argued, was the malice required for second-degree murder. It was about the decision to abandon him.
Okay, that distinction is crucial. And didn't O'Keefe's phone data also play into their timeline, sort of locking him to that spot?
Yes, that was another key piece for them. His phone was found right underneath his body, and the forensic analysis of its data, according to the prosecution, showed it never moved again after that initial time, around 12:30 a.m. No pings showing him going inside the house. No movement suggesting he walked around after being dropped off.
So it countered the he went inside theory?
Directly. For the prosecution, this data pinpointed the location and timing of the fatal event to right there on the lawn, consistent with their theory of him being hit by the car shortly after arriving and never making it inside.
All right, so that's a pretty comprehensive case from the prosecution. But the defense, they didn't just poke holes. They came back with this incredibly dramatic counter-narrative, a conspiracy, a cover-up. What was their core story?
Yeah, the defense went big. It was bold, provocative. They weren't just saying she didn't do it. They presented this entirely different scenario. Their claim, John O'Keefe was brutally beaten, but inside Brian Albert's house, not outside by Karen Reed's car.
Inside the house, by whom?
They pointed fingers, implicitly and sometimes explicitly, at people inside that house. And then, the even bigger part, they alleged a massive cover-up followed. Orchestrated, they claimed, by people connected to law enforcement, all to pin the blame on Karen Reed and protect whoever was actually responsible. It was a full frontal assault, accusing specific people and the system itself.
And to make that plausible, they had to attack basically every piece of the prosecution's evidence. Right. Starting with O'Keefe's injuries. How did they argue those didn't fit?
This was absolutely central to their case. They brought in their own forensic experts, and these experts looked at the autopsy photos, the documented injuries, the head lacerations, the swelling broken bones, black eyes, bloody nose, the cut over his eye, and they argued pretty forcefully that these injuries just didn't look like what you'd expect from being hit, especially backed into by a big SUV.
What would you expect, according to them?
They argued a car impact would likely cause more midsection trauma, maybe leg injuries, different kinds of fractures. Instead, they suggested O'Keefe's injuries looked much more consistent with a physical fight, maybe involving fists, maybe even a weapon like a glass. And then they threw in another theory.
The dog attack. That got a lot of attention.
It really did. It added this whole other layer. The defense pointed to marks on O'Keefe's arm that they suggested looked like dog bites. And then came the connection. The Alberts, the homeowners, owned a German Shepherd. And apparently this dog had a history. It had bitten someone before.
Okay.
And then, the really suspicious part, the Alberts got rid of the dog very soon after O'Keefe died, just gave it away. Now, later DNA tests didn't find definitive dog DNA on O'Keefe, But the timing of getting rid of the dog, combined with the appearance of the arm injuries, just fueled that cover-up narrative among Reed's supporters. It felt like maybe evidence was being disposed of.
Right. And the taillight, the prosecution's irrefutable proof. The defense had big problems with that too, didn't they?
Oh, they ripped into the taillight evidence. First, the timing. Why wasn't this supposedly crucial piece found until hours after the police had already been there, processed the scene? Seemed like a major oversight, or worse.
And wasn't there something about the snow?
Yes. They pointed out it was found lying on top of about 6 inches of snow that had fallen after the time Red supposedly hit him and left. How did it get there? Did it float? It made no sense if it came off the car at 12:30 a.m.
So, questioning the physics of it.
Exactly. And then they attacked the chain of custody, that documented trail of who handled the evidence. They argued there were no proper police reports, no logs, no photos of the taillight when it was first found to reliably tie it to that specific time and place. Some even floated the idea it might not have been from her car at all.
And didn't they have an alternative explanation for her damaged taillight?
They did. They showed video evidence, actual footage, of Karen Reed backing her Lexus into another parked car later that same morning when she was frantically driving around looking for O'Keefe before his body was found. So they offered this perfectly innocent explanation for why her taillight was broken, completely unrelated to hitting John O'Keefe.
Okay, so they're not just creating doubt, they're offering alternative explanations. And this ties into their broader attack on the investigation itself, calling it messy, alleging actual police misconduct, right? Especially focused on the lead investigator.
Michael Proctor. He became the poster child for the defense's claims of a corrupt investigation. And honestly, the evidence against his conduct was pretty damning. His text messages that came out during the trial were just a bombshell.
What kind of messages?
Filled with derogatory, profane language about Karen Reed, calling her name, and crucially expressing extreme personal bias against her, including one horrific text where he actually said he hoped she would kill herself.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It showed this deep, unprofessional animosity. And the defense argued, how could someone with that level of bias lead a fair and impartial investigation? It tainted everything he touched. And later, Proctor was actually fired after an internal investigation found he shared confidential case info, and his conduct was unbecoming an officer. That firing gave huge credibility to the defense's arguments.
And it wasn't just Proctor's attitude, right? The actual evidence collection methods were questioned.
Alarmingly so. The defense highlighted how the highest-ranking officer on the scene initially, retired Lieutenant Paul Gallagher, used things like red Solo cups and a brown paper grocery bag to collect blood evidence.
Seriously? Solo cups?
Seriously. And apparently stored them improperly. I mean, any expert will tell you that's just not how you handle potential biohazards or crucial forensic evidence. It completely compromises the integrity of the samples. Legal analysts were basically aghast. It cast doubt on any evidence collected that way.
And then Proctor, the lead investigator they attacked so heavily, he didn't even testify in the second trial.
Nope. After he was fired, the prosecution chose not to call him in the second trial. And you can bet the defense made a huge deal out of that.
Yeah.
Their argument was essentially, look, even the state doesn't trust their own lead investigator enough to put him on the stand. Why should you, the jury, trust any part of the investigation he led? His absence spoke volumes.
Beyond Proctor and the sloppy collection, were there other investigative holes the defense pointed to? Missing evidence.
Yes. Missing camera footage. This was a big one. Security cameras around the Albert house, including, get this, a camera on the property of the Canton Police Chief right across the street. Footage from the critical hours was just gone. Missing.
That seems convenient for some.
Extremely convenient, the defense argued. How does crucial footage, especially from the police chief's house, just disappear? It fueled the cover-up narrative. And they also claimed the investigation report provided to them was significantly different from an earlier version, alleging that potentially exculpatory evidence stuff that might have helped Reed had been removed.
And the connections between Proctor and the Alberts, did the defense dig into that?
They did. They alleged Proctor knew the Alberts socially pretty well, despite denials. And then this text message surfaced. Brian Albert's wife apparently texted Proctor just days after O'Keefe died, saying something like she wanted to get him a gift when this is all over.
Wow. That looks terrible.
It looks really bad. It suggests an inappropriate closeness, maybe even a quid pro quo. It fed right into that defense narrative of a tight-knit group protecting each other, with Proctor potentially helping steer the investigation away from the Alberts.
Speaking of the Alberts, their behavior that morning when O'Keefe was found dead on their lawn, the defense found that suspicious too.
Highly suspicious, according to the defense. Here's their colleague, found dead practically on their doorstep, and the Alberts never came outside. Didn't check on him, didn't offer help, just stayed inside. The defense portrayed this as incredibly unnatural and suspect.
And their actions afterwards, the dog, the house.
Right. All those things stacked up for the defense. Getting rid of the dog known to bite, having their basement renovated shortly after, putting the house up for sale relatively quickly. They painted these as actions of people trying to hide something, erase potential evidence, distance themselves from the event.
And inside the house that night, wasn't there a nephew, Colin Albert, who the defense focused on?
Yes, Colin Albert. Brian Albert's 18-year-old nephew. He was definitely there that night. And there were rumors, or allegations, that he didn't get along with O'Keefe, maybe had a bad relationship. Then photos emerged, taken soon after O'Keefe's death, that appeared to show scrapes and bruises on Colin's knuckles.
Ah, suggesting a fight.
That's exactly how the defense spun it, evidence of a physical altercation. They suggested maybe Colin, or others inside, had fought with O'Keefe, causing those injuries the defense argued didn't come from a car. It offered a potential alternative source for the trauma.
Okay, but maybe the most explosive piece for the defense, the thing that seemed to blow up the timeline, was Jen McCabe's phone, right? The Google search.
This was huge, absolutely explosive. Jen McCabe, Brian Albert's sister-in-law, one of the women with Red when the body was found, her phone records allegedly showed a Google search for hose long to die in cold.
Oh, okay.
Hose likely a typo for how.
Okay, but when was the search?
That's the bombshell. The timestamp was allegedly 2:27 a.m. This is hours before O'Keefe's body was found. And crucially, it's before even the prosecution claimed Reed would have hit him.
So how could she know to search that then?
Exactly. McCabe claimed it was some kind of timestamp glitch, that she really searched it around 6 a.m. when they were looking for him. But she also apparently searched for how long to digest food around the same early time and deleted texts and calls with Brian Albert. It all looked incredibly suspicious. The defense later claimed a federal investigation confirmed the 2:27 a.m. timestamp was accurate. If true, it completely undermines her credibility and suggests someone knew O'Keefe was outside, dying in the cold, long before he was officially found.
Wow, that's huge. And Brian Albert's phone records were also problematic.
They seem to be. He reportedly made several calls around 2:22 a.m. to Brian Higgins, another cop who'd been at the earlier party but left, supposedly for work. But Albert himself claimed he was asleep at 2:22 a.m. So his phone records contradicted his own alibi. And then, there were reports from the federal investigation suggesting Albert was recorded sounding anxious that Higgins hadn't contacted him after subpoenas went out. The defense interpreted this as Albert worrying Higgins might cooperate with investigators, might have flipped, potentially revealing damaging information about what really happened that night.
So putting it all together, the defense wasn't just creating doubt. They were painting this picture of an us versus them situation. Karen Reed, the outsider, against this connected group covering their tracks.
That was exactly the narrative they built, and it was powerful. A tight-knit group, law enforcement, family, friends, orchestrating a cover-up to protect one or more of their own and framing Karen Reed. It tapped into public distrust of powerful institutions, the idea that the system could be manipulated. It became this battle of the outsider against the potentially corrupt insiders.
And the fact that the federal government, the DOJ and FBI, got involved and started their own probe, that must have added serious weight to the cover-up theory in the public eye.
Immensely so. When the feds step in to investigate the state's investigation, that sends a huge signal. It suggests serious concerns about police shadiness, as some put it, at a high level. The defense hammered this point, claiming the massive federal report, even though it wasn't public, confirmed key parts of their theory, like McCabe's 2:27 a.m. search, and that O'Keefe's injuries couldn't have been from a car. Plus, the state DOJ also opened its own probe into Michael Proctor specifically. All these external investigations lent significant credibility to the defense's claims of serious misconduct.
It's such a compelling story they built, but you do have to wonder, Occam's razor, right? The simplest explanation is usually the best. Is it really simpler to believe a dozen people orchestrated this elaborate conspiracy and kept it secret, or that a very drunk woman made a terrible mistake?
That is the absolute core tension of this case. It's what made it so endlessly debated. On one side, yes, a widespread conspiracy involving multiple people coordinating lies and hiding evidence. That seems complex, hard to pull off flawlessly. Occam's razor would maybe point towards the simpler explanation, a tragic accident fueled by alcohol.
But
we also know conspiracies do happen, cover-ups do occur, especially within close-knit groups where there's a strong incentive to protect each other, like shared jobs and law enforcement, family ties. The defense played heavily on that dynamic. Reed, the outsider girlfriend, versus this interconnected group with institutional power. They argued the power imbalance in the specific relationships made a cover-up not just possible, but maybe even predictable self-preservation. And let's be honest, public skepticism about police integrity, particularly in Massachusetts, which has seen its share of scandals, made that narrative resonate strongly. It really became a question for the jury, which complex story felt more believable, given the evidence, the inconsistencies, and the witnesses.
Okay, so these two powerhouse narratives clash. Let's talk about the trials themselves. The first one didn't even end with a verdict.
Dope. The first trial in 2024, after weeks of testimony and over 22 hours of jury deliberation, ended deadlocked. A starkly divided hung jury. They couldn't reach a unanimous decision on any charge, so mistrial, which just ramped up the pressure and the anticipation for the second go-around, starting April 2025.
Yeah.
It showed just how divided people were, even after hearing all the initial evidence.
And jury selection for round 2 must have been a nightmare. With all the media attention, the case was everywhere.
An absolute nightmare for the court. It had gone completely viral. Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, dedicated blogs, everyone had an opinion. They found something like 90% of potential jurors already knew about the case.
90%. How do you find an impartial jury then?
They had to summon hundreds and hundreds of extra potential jurors. It was a massive pool. Eventually, they seated 18 people, 12 main jurors, 6 alternates, who all promised they could be impartial, decide only on the courtroom evidence. And in a really unusual move, the judge ordered the jurors' names sealed, kept private, specifically to protect them from harassment and outside pressure. It just highlighted this huge modern problem. How do you ensure a fair trial when public opinion is already so strong and loud online?
Okay, fast forward to the end of that second trial, the closing arguments. Each side's last chance to convince the jury. What were their final pitches?
The prosecution, led by Hank Brennan this time, really doubled down on their core theory. He hammered home that Karen Reed made a decision, that conscious choice to leave O'Keefe in the snow after hitting him. He pointed again to the taillight as proof of the collision, and he addressed the Proctor issue head-on, basically saying, yeah, Proctor messed up, he paid the price by being fired, but we don't need him. The evidence still points to her, trying to minimize that damage.
And the defense. Alan Jackson, he went hard on the corruption angle, I assume.
Oh, yeah. Jackson's closing was fiery. He basically declared the whole case corrupted from the start because of Michael Proctor. He kept repeating, if the state police fired Proctor, how can you trust anything from his investigation? And he hit hard on what he called literally the most important point, that no medical expert, not even the prosecutions, testified O'Keefe's injuries were definitely consistent with being hit by a car. He argued that undermined their whole theory.
So what did he say caused the injuries?
He pointed again to evidence suggesting a fight inside the house. O'Keefe missing his coat, having only one shoe on, that broken drinking glass found near the body. All signs, Jackson argued, of an indoor struggle before O'Keefe somehow ended up outside.
All right. So after all that, weeks of trial, 4 days of jury deliberation in the second trial, June 18th, 2025, the verdict comes down. What happened?
It was a stunning moment. The jury found Karen Reed not guilty of the major charges, not guilty of second-degree murder, not guilty of manslaughter while operating under the influence, not guilty of involuntary manslaughter, and not guilty of motor vehicle homicide. A huge win for the defense. It meant the jury had reasonable doubt about whether she caused his death in the way the prosecution claimed.
But she wasn't acquitted of everything.
Right. They did find her guilty on one lesser count, operating under the influence, the OUI charge, which essentially acknowledged, yes, she was driving drunk that night, but didn't find that her drunk driving led directly to his death. She received a year of probation for that OUI conviction.
And the reaction from John O'Keefe's family must have been devastating.
Absolutely gut-wrenching. His cousin, Vanessa Rizzitano, spoke for the family. She called the cheers from Reed supporters outside the courthouse sickening. And she said Reed's statement afterwards, where Reed claimed, no one has fought harder for justice for John O'Keefe than I have, that just enraged the family. They felt they were the ones fighting for John, and Reed's words were a slap in the face. The divide was just absolute.
And Reed's response?
She thanked her supporters profusely, saying their financial and emotional backing was crucial, and she repeated her claim about fighting for John's justice. But it's worth noting, her legal troubles aren't totally over. There's still a civil lawsuit pending against her, filed by O'Keefe's family, seeking damages.
This whole case, the drama, the police issues, it got compared to some other really famous, infamous Massachusetts trials, didn't it?
It really did. Legal analysts like Andrea Cabral drew direct lines to the O.J. Simpson trial, specifically comparing the impact of Michael Proctor's misconduct to how Detective Mark Furman's credibility collapse damaged the prosecution's case back then. It showed how investigator bias can overshadow evidence. And yeah, the Reed case definitely entered that sort of pantheon of Massachusetts trials that capture national attention. People mentioned Louise Woodward, the au pair, Aaron Hernandez, the NFL star turned murderer, Whitey Bulger, the mob boss, even the Boston Marathon bomber trial. It just shows the level of public fascination and the complex issues it stirred up about police, justice, and media.
Beyond all the courtroom drama, this case really put a spotlight on something fundamental: forensic evidence and expertise. Can you remind us what forensic evidence actually is?
Sure. Forensic evidence is basically any information or physical object that's gathered using scientific methods specifically for use in court. Think DNA, fingerprints, ballistics, chemical analysis, digital evidence from phones or computers. A key thing to remember, though, is that a lot of it is circumstantial. It doesn't usually screen guilty on its own. It requires careful interpretation and logical steps to connect it to the crime. And its value completely depends on how well it was collected, preserved, and analyzed.
And the experts who analyze it, how important are they in a trial like this?
Oh, they're absolutely pivotal. They're the translators, really.
Yeah.
They take complex scientific findings and explain them to the judge and jury in a way they can understand. They can identify substances, link suspects to scenes, reconstruct events based on physical evidence, test witness statements against the science. Their testimony can literally swing a case one way or the other.
And we definitely saw a battle of the experts in the Red trial.
We absolutely did. You had Dr. Marie Russell, the forensic pathologist for the prosecution, whose opinion on the cause of death, blunt impact, and hypothermia was key to their case, even though the defense contested her interpretation of the injuries. Then the defense brought in RRCCA experts, these crash reconstruction specialists. Their whole job was to analyze the physics, the car damage, the scene, to argue scientifically that O'Keefe's specific injuries couldn't have been caused by Wright's Lexus backing into him. It really became expert versus expert on the crucial question of how he was injured.
But the case also highlighted some really worrying problems with how forensic evidence gets handled before it even gets to the experts, right? The collection process.
Yes, and this was a huge vulnerability for the prosecution. The defense jumped all over those instances of sloppy evidence handling, using solo cups for blood, improper storage, potential contamination risks. And the big one, problems with the chain of custody. That's the unbroken documented record of who had the evidence, where it was, and when, from the moment it's collected until it's presented in court.
Why is that chain so important?
Because if that chain is broken or unclear, you can't be sure the evidence wasn't tampered with, mixed up, or compromised somehow. It loses its reliability, its evidentiary value. It might even get thrown out of court entirely. Analysts pointed out that these minor slip-ups, as the defense sometimes called them, could have major consequences, casting doubt on the integrity of the prosecution's entire physical case.
Okay, and then there's the other massive factor in any big case today: social media. The Karen Reed case basically exploded online, didn't it? People called it a digital uprising.
It really did. It became this huge online phenomenon. You had citizen journalists, most notably Aidan Kearney, who goes by Turtle Boy online. He became this massive voice championing Reed's innocence through his blog, podcasts, social media. He relentlessly pushed the police cover-up narrative and rallied thousands of very vocal supporters online and at the courthouse. The online momentum was incredible and definitely shaped public perception way before the verdict.
But that online activism crossed lines, didn't it? It got pretty nasty.
It got very nasty and legally problematic. Kearney's tactics were super aggressive, and he ended up getting arrested and charged with witness intimidation and conspiracy for allegedly harassing people involved in the case. It got so bad the district attorney actually put out a public statement demanding the harassment stop, calling it baseless. It really highlighted that dangerous edge where online advocacy can become illegal intimidation, blurring ethical lines.
And all that online noise, that viral exposure, made finding an impartial jury almost impossible, as we talked about.
Exactly. It was a perfect storm showing the challenge courts face now. How do you find 12 people who haven't already been influenced by thousands of tweets, blog posts, and YouTube videos dissecting every detail, often with a strong bias? It required those extraordinary measures like summoning extra jurors and keeping their names secret, a real sign of the times.
And the public itself got so divided, almost like picking teams.
Completely polarized. You had incredibly passionate supporters on both sides. A lot of women seemed to identify strongly with Karen Reed, feeling like she was being railroaded by a powerful system, the whole "this could happen to me" feeling. They showed up in pink, used hand signs. But then others found Red herself unsympathetic, pointing to her demeanor in court, the perceived smirks, and leaned against her. Personalities and appearances really seemed to sway public opinion, sometimes more than the actual evidence being presented in court.
It also seemed like for some people online, the case became almost like entertainment, a puzzle to solve.
That's a really interesting point. For many followers, yes, it did become this captivating puzzle. It was an escape, something to dive into, analyze, debate. It created this online community all focused on solving it, which is engaging, but some experts warned about the downside, getting so caught up in the puzzle that you lose sight of the real human tragedy at the center of it, John O'Keefe's death. It risked turning a real person's tragic end into just another piece of online content.
So as we wrap this up, after digging through all these layers, the conflicting stories, the controversies, what are the main takeaways? What should listeners really think about after hearing all this?
Well, I think this Karen Reed saga really shows that incredibly complex interplay between forensic evidence, legal strategy, public opinion, and crucially, the conduct and integrity of law enforcement. It hammers home just how high the bar is for the prosecution to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, especially when the investigation itself has serious flaws, serious questions raised about it, and when you have two such powerful competing narratives presented. The verdict brought relief for Reed, obviously, but it clearly didn't bring closure or answers for everyone, especially O'Keefe's family. It just highlights the immense complexity and the very real human cost involved in our justice system.
It really does. And it's a stark reminder, isn't it, that truth in a courtroom isn't always some simple, absolute thing. It's often the conclusion drawn from what evidence gets presented, how it's argued, and ultimately how it's perceived by 12 people, which leads to a big question for all of us, I think.
In this age where we're just flooded with information, opinions are so strong, narratives get locked in, how do we, as people trying to stay informed, actually navigate these super complex legal stories to form our own fair, balanced understanding? How do we filter the noise to find the substance?
That's the challenge, isn't it? It takes real effort, critical thinking, and maybe resisting the urge to jump to conclusions too quickly.
Definitely something to think about. If you found this deep dive thought-provoking, we really hope you'll continue to reflect on all the different facets of this case. What part of the story stands out most to you? What questions are still lingering? Let us know in the comments. We do read them.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
And if you want to hear more explorations like this, digging into complex and important stories, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's called Whispers of Crime. Make sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next release.
You can also find us on Spotify and pretty much wherever else you get your podcasts. Following us there helps too. And definitely check out our back catalog if you haven't already. We've covered a lot of other fascinating cases and topics that you might find just as compelling. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.